Vamos haciendo la presentación de la segunda ponencia del día de hoy. Es un honor presentar al segundo expositor de esta sesión, quien nos acompaña desde Estados Unidos de manera virtual. La ponencia titulada Las Normas Internacionales de Educación, Desarrollando competencias y habilidades para el contador competitivo, estará a cargo del CPA Bruce Vivian, contador público certificado y líder ejecutivo con 18 años de experiencia trabajando y desarrollando temas de la profesión contable a nivel local y regional. Él es un consultor internacional, tiene experiencia en educación contable y con gran pasión por el desarrollo sostenible y la cooperación internacional. Ha trabajado en los sectores público-privado y sin fines de lucro. Cree en el poder de reunir a diferentes partes interesadas y voluntarios de diversas culturas y contextos para impulsar cambios positivos. Bruce se unió al equipo de IFAC en el año 2021. Actualmente se desempeña como director de educación contable, liderando el trabajo de IFAC para impulsar el desarrollo de la educación contable en todo el mundo. Damas y caballeros, recibamos con un fuerte aplauso al CPA Bruce Vivian.
Well, I hope I'm audible. If I can just get a sense from that everything is fine with our interpreter before I proceed.
One moment, Bruce.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Excuse me, I don't speak English.
It sounds like you speak it very well.
Sorry. Ahora prefiero que veamos con Diana, que estamos resolviendo solo un tema técnico para poder hacer la traducción en simultáneo. María Isabel, si nos confirmas, por favor. Sí. Diana, ¿nos llegas a escuchar? Sí. Buenos días. Entonces tenemos ya en sala también al señor Bruce. Adelante.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And good morning to everyone. I trust you are having an excellent event. These moments in our profession when we all come together are such important moments to learn, to network, to even learn while we're networking from others. And so I really do hope this event is proving helpful for you and that you are thinking about what the things you are learning about this week mean for your day-to-day work. I want to start off by just acknowledging that accountancy education is a discipline that involves all of us. Yes, I know there are some in the room who are educators, who are working in universities and teaching the future accountants. But it's not only those in the universities involved in this process, it includes everyone across our profession, including those in government, those in regulatory functions, as well as all of you who practice as accountants or as auditors and who have people working for you who are aspiring to be professional accountants or who are just young professional accountants learning the way of working and how we practice the accountancy. And so I want to acknowledge and recognize every single one of you who are involved in developing the future of our profession. The work you do is so critically important, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in the practical practice of our work. My role today is going to be to share with you some perspectives from our work at IFAC on accountancy education, and particularly to talk a bit about what the competencies and skills are that are most important for an accountant to remain competitive and relevant into the future. And so as I present, I'm going to cover a few aspects to assist us in this exploration. First of all, I'm going to be giving you a bit of background to a set of standards that we maintain at IFAC called the International Education Standards. After that, I will talk a little bit about the skills that we believe are needed for sustainability, reporting, and assurance. Then I will reflect a bit about what the skills are that are needed for an accountant to work effectively with artificial intelligence. And finally, I'm going to give a reflection on what skills are needed in a changing world. So let me start with a bit of background to the International Education Standards, or the IESs. Now, the IESs are a global baseline for accountancy education. These standards are maintained by IFAC in partnership with our International Panel on Accountancy Education. These standards are authoritative for IFAC member organizations like the Junta in Peru. And the idea is that these standards should be used by both our members, but also everyone who's involved in accountancy education, who I mentioned before, to ensure that future professional accountants will have the skills they need to be effective in their roles, but also that they will have the skills needed, that they will maintain their skills after qualifying to ensure they remain relevant. Now, on the screen, and I realize this might be a little bit small for those sitting near the back, this is a diagram that just summarizes the International Education Standards. And the detail is not very important, but what I want you to see is that there are three parts. This first part here, then in the middle, and then the part on the right-hand side. And so what I want you to see here is that this speaks to the different process that an accountant would go through, or that education would require. The first part on the left is the entry requirements to a program. And so when you begin the process of entering into, for example, a university degree, what are those basic requirements that you need to have to ensure that you're going to have a reasonable chance of success? I won't be talking about that today. Then we have the part that reflects on what is needed during the initial professional development of a professional accountant. And this includes a few aspects. The three boxes at the top here are standards that describe the actual learning outcomes that we expect an accountant to achieve before they qualify, before they are certified in the country. And so these go into detail about the technical competence that you need, your professional skills or soft skills, as well as your professional values, ethics, and attitudes. Then we have two standards that deal with some elements of process. One, to say that, of course, practical experience, learning on the job, is an important part of your professional development. And finally, we would typically expect an element of formal assessment. And so I know that in Peru, much of this work happens at the universities, although I understand there is some work to have that happening at a national level too. But for purposes of today, I will talk about this in the sense of what is learned in the university curricula. And then finally, on the right-hand side is continuing professional development. And we have a standard called IES 8 that provides learning outcomes that are needed for somebody to be able to practice as a partner on audit engagements. Again, that's not something I'll be talking about today, but I'm very much focused today on this part, the initial professional development or the learning outcomes. And although I'm going to be talking about initial professional development, these really speak to skills, to competencies that all of us as professional accountants need to have and need to maintain throughout our career. And when we're thinking about the future of the profession, when we're thinking about the skills we need to remain relevant into the future, it is our responsibility at IFAC to make sure we maintain these standards to ensure that the learning outcomes that are described provide a signal to the global accountancy profession of where we need to be moving to make sure that we do indeed remain relevant. We've just recently completed a project to revise IES 2, 3, and 4 for sustainability reporting and assurance. And I'm going to be talking a bit about that project and its outcomes in the next part of my presentation. We are also beginning work to reflect on what artificial intelligence will mean for these skills that are described in these standards. And we are considering more broadly around what is required for professional accountants to remain relevant into the future. So allow me to start the main part of my presentation by talking a little bit about skills for sustainability reporting and assurance. And as I just said, we just completed a project which took place over the last 2 years through a thorough due process that included extensive consultation with a variety of stakeholders around the world, a formal exposure draft that was issued last year and received comment letters from around the world. And finally, the whole process to bring that to finality, where our education panel endorsed the standards and the IFAC board just a few weeks ago approved the final standards. And just last week, we published the final version of these revisions. And so this slide just gives a very high-level overview of what those changes are and the approach we've taken. When we think about curricula, when we think about how sustainability reporting should affect the curricula that are taught at universities, the one consistent message we heard from stakeholders is that sustainability is not just something we add on. It is not just a standalone module or standalone subject that should be taught in isolation, but rather it needs to be embedded throughout accountancy curricula. That is the approach we've taken in our revisions to our standards, but we also believe that is the approach that universities and others involved in accountancy education should take to ensure that sustainability concepts are embedded, are integrated across accountancy curricula. Now, we recognize that that may take some time. Sometimes these changes may start as separate subjects, but over time we hope to see sustainability being embedded throughout. Part of the point of this is that sustainability disclosures are not meant to be standalone concepts, but should form part of the broader financial reporting of an organization. Similarly, from an assurance perspective, when we provide assurance over these disclosures, that should not be an exercise that is done separately from the financial statements audit. So many of these concepts are integrated. If we think simply about something like emissions that are coming from buildings, so let's say you have an organization that has factories scattered across the country, and each of those factories contribute to certain carbon emissions. Well, when you are preparing your reporting on this, the financial statements is a great source of information regarding the value of those factories and how many factories there are around the country. That is really important when you think then about how you do the reporting to make sure that your disclosures of carbon emissions are complete. We do that by seeing this link between the two, and how, as we, for example, increase our capital investment and build more factories, so we would expect to see those carbon emissions going up. Perhaps at a slower rate if management is intentionally trying to build factories in a way that is more sustainable and reduces emissions. But the link between these two things can't be separated. And so for this reason, we've taken this approach to embed it. There's another reason why we embed it, and that's because we believe that sustainability and sustainability information is relevant to almost everything that accountants learn and that accountants ultimately do. So whether that's the day-to-day management accounting that happens within an organization, where that should not just be about budgeting, for example, and tracking the budgets of financial information. That should also be about planning and budgeting for your carbon emissions or for your social impact, and what that's going to look like, and then tracking that throughout the year. It affects tax to the extent that there is reported that there are tax implications of our emissions. If there's special rebates that are given within the country for more carbon efficient approaches, then that's going to affect the tax calculation. And so it's a part of that. It's of course part of the audit engagement and the effect that, thinking about the effect that sustainability factors may have on the value of the organization. It affects our understanding of the business. We don't want to just understand the business from a financial perspective, but we want to understand how these sustainability factors affect the business. And I could go on and on into different aspects. You'll see in my next slide shortly how this plays out. Another thing that we've done in our revisions is to add a new competence area. So these standards, they have learning outcomes, but the learning outcomes are categorized by different competence areas. Historically, we had a competence area for audit, for the audit of financial statements. We have now added, before audit, a competence area on assurance. And the idea here is that things like sustainability assurance are going to become more prevalent, and many more accounting practitioners will be involved in assurance engagements for sustainability, but not just for sustainability, because we are hearing from across the world increased demand for accountants to provide assurance over a variety of different subject matters. So yes, sustainability, but other things like cybersecurity, perhaps in the future, artificial intelligence, and many other areas. And so perhaps those who are present from the firms today are familiar with this and hearing those requests for more assurance over different subject matters coming through. And so we've responded by adding this increased focus in the initial professional development of accountants to focus on those competencies you need to be able to work on various assurance engagements. We chose not to call out sustainability specifically because we believe this is broader, but as sustainability assurance becomes more commonplace within a jurisdiction, we would expect to see greater teaching of sustainability assurance in that jurisdiction. In our revisions, we've also strengthened the focus on business acumen. And this is really about understanding how sustainability factors affect the business, understanding things like value chains, understanding how sustainability factors affect the metrics and targets that are set by an organization. And so I will come to that in a bit more detail on my following slide. We've also enhanced areas of behavioral competence. I'm not sure how well the term behavioral competence will translate, but this is your softer skills, your professional skills. These skills, like our communication skills, like our ability to work in teams, like our critical thinking. And so we've enhanced these. Many of the skills that accountants have currently are already inherently relevant and transferable to the discipline of sustainability reporting and assurance. But there are some areas where we've enhanced to increase the emphasis, because we have heard in our outreach that many of these behavioral competencies are the things that are most critical to ensuring an accountant can deliver high quality services in the area of sustainability. And finally, in our standards, we've increased explanatory materials. I won't go into detail on that in my presentation today. But on my next slide, this is a very big slide. I'm going to spend some time on this and I'm going to zoom in on some specific elements. We have made these changes that we have made cut across so many different areas. And as I said, because we've chosen to embed sustainability, it has touched on many of these different aspects. So areas from business acumen to behavioral issues, data and information, reporting, that key aspect of the work that we do as accountants, and then of course, assurance. So let me highlight a couple of these elements and what it means for the skills of the professional accountant. In the area of business acumen, we really need to ensure that we are experts, whether we are working in organizations, in finance functions, or whether we are working on the side of the auditors or assurance providers. It is absolutely critical that we understand the businesses we work with. This is not something new. This has always been important. But I think historically, we have often, as accountants, been quite good on the financial side, reasonably good on the operational side, but things like sustainability tended to happen in different departments within an organization. What is changing is that the elements of sustainability are increasingly becoming part of the finance function. It affects strategy, it affects decision making. And so as accountants, we need to understand what this means. We need to understand what risks and opportunities look like within an organization. That includes financial risks and opportunities. That includes sustainability related risks and opportunities. And it will include other risks and opportunities that affect the business. And so in our revisions, we've tried to emphasize or tried to open this up to refer to risks and opportunities broadly, but that does capture sustainability related risks and opportunities. As an accountant working in an organization or working on audits and assurance engagements, we need to have a good understanding of how internal and external factors affect a business. And so this can include elements of how things like climate change or social issues affect the organization, the so-called outside-in way of thinking. We also need to understand how internal factors, how the operations of the organization affect the societies and the economy and the environment around the organization. And so we need to see these linking. We need to be able to think in an integrated fashion to understand how the organization sits within the context of society and of the environment. And we need to really get comfortable with this idea of being uncomfortable. So what do I mean by this? In the context of sustainability, the numbers and the information we deal with is inherently uncertain. Financial numbers, although financial numbers have always included an element of estimation and evaluation, there's still been a degree of certainty. And I think very often as accountants, we've prided ourselves by being able to bring certainty to the financial numbers that are reported. But we've heard increasingly that there's uncertainty in sustainability information. Much of this is based on best estimates. It's forward-thinking information. And so this leads to the idea that there's going to be different alternatives that businesses need to choose from, different scenarios, and I'll come to scenario analysis a little bit later. And so the idea that in decision making, there isn't just one source of information, but that we need to be helping management to make decisions, to weigh up different alternatives to ensure that the right decision is made. Sometimes the right financial decision might not be the right sustainability decision. And so again, we need to be providing information to decision makers within the business and outside the business to be able to inform their decision making and to allow them to consider these different alternatives that may exist. So really, we've recognized the importance of upping our game, of strengthening our business acumen, our understanding of the business and how the business exists within an economy, within society, within the environment in which it operates. Then we've looked at this behavioral side, which I mentioned earlier, the soft skills. And there are a few elements, and I heard this coming up briefly at the end of the previous session, this element of communication being critical. So we heard a lot around the importance of accountants being able to collaborate and communicate. This is not new, but what is new is that we are working increasingly with people who are not accountants. We're working increasingly with people from non-finance disciplines, particularly in this area of sustainability. And so our ability to collaborate with others has become more important than ever. And then our ability to communicate information and messages has become more important than ever. We have heard much of the controversy around sustainability reporting, terms like greenwashing, and this organizations have been accused of this, of providing information to market what they do for sustainability purposes, rather than providing information that is reliable about the impact the organization has on society and the effect of these external factors on the organization. And so our ability to communicate this information clearly, without bias, with integrity is of critical importance. Also, our ability to communicate in a way that is understandable to those that are not from our profession, those who are going to be using this information, but who come from different backgrounds. That is going to become increasingly important. The ability to work effectively in a multidisciplinary team, particularly if you think about an assurance engagement. It may not be just accountants who are involved in a team that's working on a sustainability assurance engagement. And so our ability to work increasingly with people that come from different backgrounds to us is going to be critically important. One of the most interesting things we changed in our standards was to enhance this issue of decision making and to introduce the concept of informed decisions. And what we mean by informed decisions is that you don't just make decisions by standing on your own and reaching a well-reasoned conclusion. You don't just make decisions, whether it be for reporting purposes or as you advise business or on an assurance engagement. You don't make those decisions purely based on one source of information, but your decisions should be informed by a variety of sources of information. This comes back to my point about considering alternatives. And so in our decision making that we make as accountants, we need to increasingly ensure that those decisions are informed by a wide range of data sources. And then intellectual curiosity. Perhaps this is one of the most important parts of this takeaways for today. Our ability to continuously be curious, to want to learn more, want to know more. And so in the context of sustainability reporting, we are going to be working in spaces where we are working with subject matters that we've never worked with before. These may change. Currently, there's a great focus on climate, but increasingly we're going to be expected to learn more about issues of biodiversity, more about issues of social impact, and so on. We are going to need to encounter these new subject matters and then go away and do the work to understand them better. And that can include through interactions with people from other disciplines. It can include reading, can include going on additional training courses. But the critical importance is that we remain curious, that we always want to learn and know more so we can serve our clients and our organizations better. I'm going to go quite quickly through the last three, but data and information, our ability to work increasingly with metrics and targets that are not financial necessarily, but are focused on sustainability issues, critically important. In sustainability, the ability to understand and analyze data coming from across a value chain, including the supply chain of an organization. This is going to bring many challenges with it, with the data not being so structured, not all looking the same, and coming from a variety of sources that we don't know if we can trust or not. This is going to pose challenges to us, but it's an element that we're going to have to get better at working in. And then scenario analysis, the ability to look at different scenarios, to calculate different potential outcomes, and provide that information to decision makers to help inform their decisions. Again, this is about considering alternatives, understanding that there may be different possible outcomes depending on how, for example, the climate changes, or what happens in society, political situations, and so on. And as accountants, we can provide helpful information to support decision making. On the reporting side, this is perhaps the easiest part. Of course, we want accountants to be able to prepare high quality sustainability disclosures in line with international standards such as IFRS S1 and S2. We've used the term general purpose financial reporting. In the past, we focused on the idea that accountants need to be able to prepare and interpret financial statements. We are now using language from the world of IFRS to talk about broader general purpose financial reporting, which includes sustainability disclosures. And then the element of being able to analyze connected information. I mentioned this earlier. Financial information and sustainability information is inherently connected. An accountant needs to understand those linkages and what they mean. Finally, on assurance, I highlighted earlier that we've placed increased emphasis on the broader concepts around assurance. And this is really about getting the fundamentals right around the principles of assurance, whatever the subject matter, and being able to then apply those to different disciplines, such as audit, such as sustainability assurance, but potentially in other fields as well. And the issue of connected information here and what it means for an audit and for a sustainability assurance engagement is also critical for the accountant to understand. Finally, on sustainability, ethics, of course, is the foundation of everything. The ISBA, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, recently revised the International Code of Ethics to recognize how sustainability affects the code. And so that is something that will affect the education of future accountants. Big emphasis on reducing our bias in communication and what it means to rely on the work of others and external experts. So people from different disciplines who may not have the same ethical foundations as our profession does, or working with those deep in value chains and trying to understand whether they have adhered to ethical principles in the way we would expect as they've prepared information. So that is quite a lot of information about sustainability. The point I want to bring across here is that sustainability affects everything, and it is critical that we think about that from an education perspective to ensure that we are embedding sustainability principles across accountancy education going forward. We have a number of resources that are available on our website to support with this change. The easiest way to find that is to go to ifac.org. And on the front, right on the front page at the moment, we are featuring our sustainability revisions to the education standards. So you will find a link there and you can go in and find more information and all the supporting materials we have. Now, as I move towards the end of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence just briefly, and then a final thought on future skills. Now, artificial intelligence, we have not revised our standards yet for artificial intelligence. We are listening. We are trying to understand what AI is going to mean for the future skills of the professional accountant. And so we don't have the clear answer on that yet. There are many people who have views on what artificial intelligence means for the profession. Not everyone agrees. So this is a fast-changing world. AI is becoming more and more pervasive in our day-to-day lives. And so we're reflecting on this at IFAC, but I want to share a few observations that we've had based on recent engagements we've had with stakeholders around the world, as well as some insights we gained from an event that we ran just last week with education directors from around the world. So I'll share some brief insights from that. But first of all, two fundamental issues that I encourage you to consider in this area. The first thing we have heard is that many people are saying that AI will replace accountants. Now at IFAC, we don't agree with that. In fact, what we think and what we have heard from around the world is that it is not that AI will replace accountants. Rather, it is that accountants who use AI in their day-to-day work will replace accountants who don't use AI. Primarily because it will just be incredibly inefficient to work without AI, and the quality of the services you can deliver will diminish relative to those who are willing to embrace this technology and work with it. So that's the first important thing that we all need to figure out how we're going to use AI in our day-to-day work. The second really important message I want to give you in this area that again has come from engagements with experts around the world on this is that AI is not going to replace the expertise you need as an accountant. In fact, one of our stakeholders told us this. He said that if you want to be a power user of artificial intelligence, you first need to be an expert in your discipline. In other words, you cannot come from outside of the profession with no understanding of accounting and ask AI to help you do the work of an accountant. It's possible that you may be able to do that somewhat, that you may be able to at least pretend like you know what you're speaking about, but the challenge is you will be unable to critique the output that comes from that AI tool. You'll be unable to identify when it's getting something wrong. You'll be unable to interpret what it's telling you. You'll be unable to problem solve and to communicate that information effectively to others. And so this idea really emphasizes that as educators, as those involved in accountancy education, we need to make sure we continue to develop the skills of the accountants of the future. They're pure, strong technical accounting skills. Those will be absolutely critical. But we need them to develop those skills alongside developing certain competencies in working with technology, and in particular, working with artificial intelligence. So on my next two slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about what those skills look like. And again, this is based on what we heard from experts at an event we held just last week. So I'm going to break this into two parts: the technical skills for AI and the professional skills. So remember, we take it for granted that the technical accounting skills, the traditional accountancy skills, have to be in place and have to be strong. But on top of that, we need to layer on certain technical AI skills. And these can include, first of all, a foundational understanding of artificial intelligence and machine learning, understanding what these technologies are, broadly how they work. You don't need to be the expert in designing the future AI tool. That's not what we're looking for here. We're not looking for IT experts, but we're looking for a strong foundational understanding of what these tools are, how they work, and ultimately what that will mean for our work as accountants. I'm sure you've heard people talk about the importance of prompt engineering, the ability to ask the right question of the AI tool. And this will become really important. So this is, of course, especially in the area of generative AI, the ability to write effective prompts so that the AI tool can give you the right information you need. This is something I would imagine is going to become an active part of what is being the way a student learns in the classroom, and how they're going to work. Just as they used to open up a textbook to find an answer, they now will open up their AI tool, their kind of co-pilot, who's going to work with them to support their learning and support them as they do the work of an accountant. And then, very interestingly, the issue of data is critically important. So one of the great opportunities of AI is how it's going to help us in the analysis and interpretation of data. And so data analysis and visualization skills are even more important than they were before. We've been speaking about this for a long time in the profession: big data, the importance of data analysis. We need to continue to emphasize this, because if we're going to use an AI tool to analyze a data set, we need to be able to do the work to ensure that that data is reliable, that it's clean, that it's structured in an appropriate way that's going to work with the AI, and ultimately that it's going to be a trustworthy data set. We also need to be good at how we use data to tell stories, and the visualization, the development of reliable visualizations of that data. And then finally, the issue of governance and ethics, both over data and over artificial intelligence. And I won't go into detail on that, but that is absolutely critical, that accountants understand what should be in place to ensure that there's a strong governance over these tools, as well as that the way they are used, the way they're set up and the way they are used conforms to our ethical principles. So that's some of the technical aspects that should be understood, some additional technical content to teach accountants. But you know what? It's not just about the technical side. It's also about these behavioral aspects. Again, just like I mentioned on sustainability, our professional skills. And so we're hearing that things like critical thinking, the ability to critique what the AI is telling us, is really important. Decision-making, how you use the output from an AI tool to support decision-making. Professional skepticism, which is closely related to critical thinking. Our adaptability, our ability to pivot and change as these tools mature, as they start doing new things, they disrupt the practice of accounting. We need to be able to adapt and use these tools effectively. Do you remember intellectual curiosity from earlier? It's the same thing with AI. We need to be curious. We need to want to learn more. These tools are incredible resources to use to learn and to grow and to develop. But we need that curiosity to want to understand more about how to use those tools effectively and to be able to work with the tools to learn and to grow and to develop our skills. Increasing multidisciplinary collaboration, particularly with those in different fields, whether that be data scientists, IT experts, and others. And then finally, communication. The ability to take what these tools is doing and then turn that into information that we can communicate clearly. The AI will help with that, but we need to understand our audience effectively and make sure that we communicate the information these tools are giving us in an effective way. Very often that's in our reporting, in the financial statements, in sustainability disclosures, but there's that extra step of how you present that to different audiences and how you help them understand what that information means for them as users, as decision makers. So finally, I want to give a reflection on what do skills then look like in a changing world. So we've spoken about sustainability, we've spoken about AI. I hope that you've seen that there's a lot of overlap between the skills we need for both of these new areas. And so my final comment is to say that a lot of the skills we're going to need for the future are the same. It's these same skills. These are the skills that will set us apart as professional accountants into the future. As emerging opportunities come along that we can use to grow our businesses, to grow our services, the things that are going to set us up for success are these skills, like critical thinking, decision-making skills, professional skepticism, adaptability, multidisciplinary collaboration, communication, but most importantly, that one in blue there, intellectual curiosity. As accountants for a long time, we've always said we're committed to lifelong learning, and many of you have continued to do courses, come to events like this one today to upskill yourself, to keep up to date with the latest trends and developments in our profession. But I think we're being called to go even further, to be genuinely curious every day as we encounter new things in our work, to ensure that we do the hard work to understand, to investigate, to read, to learn more, to want to understand more, to be genuinely curious. And I believe these are the things, these skills, and particularly our curiosity, is what will set us up for success now and into the future, whatever change we may encounter within the profession. And so that's my message. I encourage you to stay curious and never stop learning. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And I look forward to taking questions from the audience.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Entonces, el colega Bruce, desde Estados Unidos. Diana, queremos que nos sigas apoyando. No sé si alguien aquí en sala tiene alguna pregunta. Ok. Entonces, por allá nos acompañan.
Muy buenos días, mi nombre es Elsa Choi. Primero, para felicitar la exposición del colega Bruce. Mis felicitaciones, ha sido muy claro, y además de la traductora. Bien, hay una honda preocupación aquí en nuestro país, porque si bien es cierto, la IFAC, a través de la Junta de Decanos de los Colegios Profesionales del Perú, supervisa el tema de las normas de educación, esas normas de educación que deberían iniciarse, como muy bien acaba de señalar, en la universidad, lamentablemente no se está dando. Y no se está dando ¿por qué? En un examen de admisión, cuando el estudiante pretende ser contador, ¿no? Pretende formarse en esta profesión, nos dice la norma que debería reunir ciertos requisitos para garantizar, ¿no? Y mantenerse con éxito hasta que concluya sus estudios. Pues muchas universidades no toman en cuenta esas normas de educación. En lo que acabas de señalar justamente en las competencias técnicas, las competencias, las habilidades y de ética, esto deberían estar incluidas en las mallas curriculares. Pero revisemos las mallas curriculares de muchas universidades, tanto nacionales como privadas, y no vamos a encontrar una alineación entre lo que dice la norma de educación, la norma de cumplimiento, la DON 2, con estos temas, ¿no? Que son los estándares 2, 3 y 4 que acabas de señalar. Se agrava más con esta última publicación que el IFAC acaba de publicar en esta semana, el 13 de marzo, justamente me enteré de que efectivamente ya había incorporado el tema de sustentabilidad. Qué bueno, pero se agrava más porque menos todavía en las mallas curriculares encontramos este término. Entonces, estamos bastante preocupados porque, bueno, yo explico esto porque tuve el privilegio de representar justamente acá en nuestro país a la DOM 2 y conozco muy bien cómo es que hemos informado al respecto, ¿no? Del avance, de qué tanto hemos avanzado en esta norma de educación. Lamentablemente todavía estamos a pasos lentos, no llegamos todavía a completar esta norma de cumplimiento que se debe ser difundida en las universidades, en el gremio, en la empresa y el propio Estado, ¿no? Por supuesto. Entonces, esa es nuestra preocupación y es la pregunta, ¿qué nos está faltando? Con tu experiencia, ¿cómo podemos impulsar este tema? ¿No? Aquí en la Junta se ha tratado de trabajar un poco de lo que es la certificación profesional, pero yo creo que va más por otro camino. Ayer escuché muy bien cuando se hablaba, empecemos por capacitar, por educar a los profesionales, y creo que esto tiene que estar de la mano y tiene que estar articulado con lo que es la sociedad, la academia y el gremio. Esa es la pregunta que te haría Bruce. Gracias.
Excellent. Thank you. Are we going to take a few questions or should I respond to that one?
Lo que creo que una por una estaría bien.
Good. Thank you. Well, thank you for that question. And of course, that gets to the heart of the challenge in your country. And I'm very mindful of that and mindful that this type of change doesn't happen overnight. I would encourage you, first of all, just to say that the fact that these standards keep moving and keep changing in response to developments across the profession is not something to necessarily worry about, that's putting you in a worse situation. Rather, it's just re-emphasizing the importance of wanting, if as a country, if as a profession in Peru, you're wanting to remain aligned to the movements in the global profession, if you're wanting to create systems that will help your own young aspiring professional accountants to be able to be mobile across your region and elsewhere, that these standards present, it's simply a goal to always be working towards. And I really want to emphasize that we know that getting these changes through is not something that happens overnight. The process of changing accounting curricula, even if you are the one responsible for it in a university, even if you're the one developing that content and teaching it, it can be just a lengthy and difficult process, especially if you don't have people working and supporting you from practice, from government and elsewhere, allowing you to go on these journeys to change. What I would say is there is definitely opportunities for what I would call a top-down approach, where the board is doing its work to advocate for adoption of these standards and for them to be implemented across the country. Very conscious that it's a very decentralized model to education in your country, and so it can that is one aspect, and that is important. But you will also need to find ways to think bottom up. So how is it that you all can influence educators, governments, decision makers in this area to be driving this change? Partly by creating awareness of these standards and of how they can be used to ensure that curriculum in your country remains up to date and relevant. And that's not just for the country as a whole, but at that local level, at that local university level. Thinking about how all role players are involved. I mentioned at the start how all of you really are involved in accountancy education in some form. So if change is not happening at the universities very quickly, there is the opportunities to find other places where we can continue to upskill professional accountants. That can be through the work that the board is doing on a professional certification. And I was very excited to hear about that work and would really encourage on that continues. In fact, in many parts of the world, it's quite common for universities to teach particular content and for the professional body to then build on top of that and to continue the learning of the aspiring professional accountant, and even once they qualify. So there's definitely an opportunity there. And then there's an opportunity on the job. If you are an employer of new accountants, newly qualified accountants, would encourage you to really think about how these standards can inform the training you give to these young people who come into roles within your organization. And particularly within the firms, there's a huge opportunity to build these skills. And obviously, we would like people to come out of university ready to practice and to be relevant, but there's always going to be some level of gap where we need to continue that learning journey. I mentioned the importance of intellectual curiosity. All of us as accountants need to carry this with us, and we need to be encouraging it in young, newly qualified accountants, that their learning should not end at the point when they qualify, when they're certified, but that should continue. And that they need to remain curious and recognize that perhaps there might be some gaps in what they were taught. Also, even if we make changes to curriculum, by the time we make the changes, sometimes the world has moved on. And so being able to continue to remain curious is important. So I've shared a few different aspects to this. And I think the point is this is a complex problem. And of course, I don't know all the intricacies of the challenges you face in your country. But what I know is that there are professional accountants scattered across Peru. There are educators scattered across your country. There are decision makers at a central level, at a more regional level, and all of us need to be working together to drive this change, both from a top-down perspective to the extent possible, but also from a bottom-up perspective. And if nothing else, if you are a practicing accountant who is passionate about seeing the future of our profession being equipped with the skills they need, I really encourage you to make connections with those in universities in your town, in your city, to offer your time to be able to go and share with those who are studying accounting at university. It doesn't have to be in the curriculum. Sometimes just a guest lecture can inspire and encourage a student. So there are many, many opportunities for how we can tackle this problem, but also just encourage you to not give up. This is a long journey, and it takes many countries continue to struggle with this. But I really encourage you to not give up. And as IFAC, we stand here ready to support in any way that we can.
Buenos días. Good morning, Bruce. My congratulations for academic ideas. For us, is very important and interesting. Haré mis preguntas en español. Antes, quería manifestarle que yo vengo de la ciudad del Cusco, Perú. Y mi nombre es Angélica Arroyo Morales. Bueno, mira, Bruce, de todas las competencias blandas o competencias actitudinales que tú has mencionado, que son las competencias del contador del futuro, dados los cambios y transformaciones que nos toca vivir también en esta década, como ya lo hemos vivido en anteriores décadas, considero que la que has mencionado como curiosidad intelectual es muy importante. Y lo digo como contadora pública con más de 50 años de ejercicio profesional y de docencia 47 años. En la Universidad Nacional San Antonio Abad del Cusco hemos hecho una investigación sobre la actitud científica de la población estudiantil de ciencias contables. Actitud científica que comprende muchos aspectos que tú has manifestado. La curiosidad insaciable, la búsqueda de la verdad, la disciplina, la perseverancia, el escepticismo y sobre todo el descartar posturas dogmáticas como son el etnocentrismo y la sacralización de las autoridades. Y hemos llegado a la conclusión de que para mejorar la actitud científica como una actitud de estilo de vida diaria, no solamente en el momento de hacer investigación científica, sino en todos los días de nuestras vidas, como personas, como ciudadanos, como vecinos, como peruanos y de cualquier nacionalidad e indudablemente en nuestra labor docente y de contador público. Hemos llegado a la conclusión entonces de que hay que promover, desarrollar, madurar más la actitud científica que tenemos en la población estudiantil. ¿Y cómo? A través de la investigación como estrategia de aprendizaje y estudio universitario. Es decir, investigación formativa en el aula universitaria. E investigación en el desempeño profesional del contador público en sus diferentes áreas.
I'm very sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make you aware, unfortunately, I'm not receiving the interpretation right now. So I'm just worried something might have gone wrong on our side. So if I could just ask our interpreter just to check that everything's okay. I'm apologies. I haven't heard anything, unfortunately, because of that. If we could just check. Diana, can you check?
Pregunta que quiero hacer, porque era importante hacer esta.
Diana, I'm still not able to hear.
Ya.
Yes, I can hear now.
Yeah.
Apologies. If you could maybe just do a quick recap of what was said, if possible, and then the lady can continue.
Excuse me, Bruce.
No problem. Apologies.
Yo necesitaba hacer un desarrollo del contexto, ¿no? Ya no lo voy a hacer. Simplemente voy a resumir en el sentido de que concuerdo contigo en la idea de que debemos promover la curiosidad intelectual. ¿Y cómo debemos promover la curiosidad intelectual? No sé cómo lo están haciendo en la academia en los Estados Unidos, pero en las universidades donde trabajamos estamos promoviendo la investigación formativa como una estrategia de estudio y aprendizaje universitario y la investigación como una estrategia en el desempeño profesional del contador público, en todos los días. Solamente así podemos adecuarnos a los grandes cambios. Nos gustaría saber, Bruce, ¿qué otras estrategias, además de la investigación formativa y la investigación durante el desarrollo profesional, podemos emprender para lograr esta curiosidad o esta curiosidad intelectual que tú manifiestas? Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Well, that is such a fantastic question, and again, apologies that I had to interrupt you and missed some of it. But you know, when I think there's two skills that were on my slide about the future skills that I think universities are actually the best at doing. And that's critical thinking and intellectual curiosity. Universities are built on the development of those two skills. So those of you who are in academia, you are the experts in this one, in intellectual curiosity and how you develop that in students, how you help students to develop a desire to want to learn, to research, to discover new things, and the critical thinking, the ability to take any work that somebody has done, be able to apply this critical mindset and to insist on information being supported by data, by reliable data. So I actually think that, generally speaking, this is an area where universities are particularly strong. A lot of what we talk about in the profession, where there's sometimes this gap between what universities are teaching and what we need in practice, actually revolves around more the technical content sometimes, and some of the like our ethical code, for example, might be a challenge, it sounds like, in your country, or the latest version of international standards. And the actual how the practice of accounting is actually taking place. But I do believe that universities have always been particularly strong in these two areas. So I would actually say that to a large extent, this is more on the profession side, that we need to get better at recognizing how important those skills are. That being said, I do think there are some things we can do to encourage intellectual curiosity. So really thinking about the way we teach. Do we just teach for knowledge purposes, or do we teach in a way that encourages a learner to go out and discover information for themselves? Teaching, encouraging not just answering questions based on some textbook, but actually requiring the learner to go out and discover beyond the textbook, and really integrating these types of approaches into education. Things like multidisciplinary teaching, which can really help with multidisciplinary teams, but can also help with intellectual curiosity. When I understand that my peers who are studying engineering, studying law, studying business, studying environmental science, or whatever their discipline might be, when I get to learn in a context where I get to interact with these individuals, I discover that there's this depth of knowledge they have in certain areas that I don't necessarily have. And so that builds in that encouragement to be always aware of what I don't know, and to be curious enough to want to understand more, to want to listen and understand people who come from different areas of expertise. And then I think in the context of the profession, just constantly creating opportunities for accountants to come together and to learn from one another. I know as accountants, we want to be kept up to date on the latest standards and so on, but it's also equally important to find opportunities to come together and learn from the way others are doing things. And so emerging practice, creating opportunities for open dialogue and knowledge sharing, and really making that a part of being in a profession. For some reason, as an accounting profession, we've become this organization, and I don't know how much this is a problem in Peru, but I see this around the world, where we become members of the profession, and then we use that to have a title behind our name, but we go out and we practice on our own. But the whole point of a profession is that we are supposed to be into learning from one another and advancing the profession together. So as somebody does something innovative, they shouldn't be keeping that to themselves, but should be sharing it. Everyone else should be curious about that. So these are some of the behaviors I think we need to drive. I do, though, really want to recognize that universities do fantastic work in this space, and the whole way universities are built and how they're built on research, on academic research, that is intellectual curiosity in a nutshell. And so I think we need to recognize more the value that can come from universities. And universities, we want them to teach the technical content, yes, but really what we want them to be doing is be preparing students to be able to practice in a context that doesn't exist yet, that's going to look different by the time they qualify. And so developing these other skills and giving them the opportunity to spend more time on such skills is critically important. I hope I've been able to respond to your question appropriately.
Muy bien, Diana. Muchas gracias. Entonces, hágale llegar nuestro extensivo agradecimiento a Bruce Vivian por su brillante participación. Solo un último comentario. Es interés de la Junta de Decanos que el acercamiento también con las universidades a nivel nacional en Perú. Para nosotros es importante que la academia pues sea parte importante de la formación de cómo queremos ahora tener contadores del futuro. Entonces, una vez más, agradecemos a Bruce Vivian